In this video, we're going to look at the impact of the economic climate on businesses. But to start with, let's make sure we know what we mean when we talk about the economy and the economic climate. You've probably heard people talk about the economy on the news or read about it online. A good way to think about the economy is that it's the level of business activity in a particular region or area, including the production and consumption of goods and services and the supply of money. When the economy is doing well, people are buying the goods and services that businesses produce, meaning businesses are doing well, and often new businesses are setting up too. The economy is looked at by area, such as the economy of London, or Scotland, or the UK, or even Europe. When you think of the word climate, you probably think hot and cold. At least that's where my mind goes. And it's not really that far off. The economic climate means the state of the economy, where a business is operating. Is the economy good or bad? Kind of like hot or cold. And this includes how well the country or region is doing in terms of the levels of employment and income, how high or low interest rates are, and whether there is a high or low inflation. Anything that affects the supply, demand, prices, or the number of things that people buy has an impact on the economy. To all the teachers out there, show all of these videos without any ads and gain access to our growing library of over 500 teaching worksheets. Why not visit bizwizard.co.uk to find out more? But before we go any further, in this video we're going to meet our main character, Lucas Leroy, a skiing instructor based in the French Alps. Lucas relies on a large number of tourists, including many from the UK, to keep his business alive. However, he has recently been affected by a number of changes in the economic climate which have had a major impact on his business. We will look at how the economic climate can impact businesses just like his. So how do we decide if the economy is good or bad, hot or cold? Well, we need to measure it. The economy is measured in terms of what's called the gross domestic product, or GDP. This is the total value of all finished goods and services produced within a country or a region. In 2020, the GDP of the UK was approximately £2 trillion. That's a lot of zeros. GDP can be used to compare the size of one country's economy to another. So, for example, the UK economy is bigger than Canada's economy, but is smaller than the US economy. GDP can also be used to show how much an economy is growing in size or decreasing in size. So, for example, the economy in the UK might have grown by 1% since last quarter. When we talk about quarters, we mean the year broken into periods of 3 months, for example, January to March. Changes in one country's GDP can also be compared to changes in another country's GDP. So, for example, the UK's economy has grown by 1%, but the US economy has fallen by 1% since the last quarter. Another important word that you might have heard of before is recession. Recessions are bad news for businesses and consumers, as it means that there's been a slowdown in economic activity. The less economic activity, the smaller the economy is, and GDP will fall. If it falls for 2 quarters, then we are in a recession. This is usually accompanied by rising unemployment and lower customer spending. Consumers tend to buy basics rather than luxuries, so for many businesses, sales and profits will fall. This means that for many businesses, they will need to reduce output and production, cutting costs and maybe even making redundancies to save on wage bills. However, some businesses, particularly those that sell just the essentials, might see a rise in demand, sales and profits when incomes are falling. So people might switch from shopping to a more expensive supermarket such as Waitrose to Aldi or Lidl. Or maybe they might buy their toiletries from stores such as Poundland instead of Boots. There are always winners and losers, so the businesses that do well in a recession might actually lose sales when the economy is actually growing. When consumer incomes are high, perhaps due to low unemployment or low interest rates, our main character Lucas's business is really busy. As he offers a premium experience in a 5-star skiing resort, people need to have disposable income to afford his services. However, when consumer incomes fall, a skiing experience with Lucas is often one of the first luxuries that will be cut from the budget, and he finds it's much harder to have a profitable ski season. Bring this video and over 100 more to life with fun, interactive games, quizzes and case studies. Why not try the first 25 completely free by visiting bizwizard.co.uk. So, businesses are clearly affected by the economic climate in their own region or country, but it's important to be aware that they can also be affected by the international economic climate, the state of the economy in other countries. If a business exports its products, that means it sells them to another country and there's a recession in the country it exports to, then this can have a big impact on sales from those countries and on the business's revenue and ultimately the profit. If a business has suppliers who are based in another country and there's a recession in that country, then it might affect the price of the goods that they are buying or the availability, particularly if their supplier goes out of business. As Lucas is heavily reliant on wealthy tourists from overseas, including many British tourists, his business is affected by the economic climate in other countries, not just in France. If there are changes in economic conditions in any of the countries where his customers live, then it could potentially affect demand from those customers in those countries. Even if consumer incomes are actually falling in France, if they are rising in Britain or any of the other countries where Lucas's customers live, then Lucas may still see decent demand, sales and profit. Each of the video courses over at bizwizard.co.uk also includes an interactive business case study that applies the knowledge learnt to a real-world scenario. There are over 1,000 multiple-choice questions, each with detailed feedback, which tests students' understanding of the content. Why not visit bizwizard.co.uk to find out more? Another impact of the international economic climate that is having an impact on British businesses is Brexit. Britain's exit from the European Union. The EU is a customs union or trade bloc that Britain was part of until the end of January 2020. We will look at customs unions and trade blocs in more detail in another video. Countries that are part of the EU or the European Union have political and economic agreements in place, including trade tariffs or taxes on imports and exports that are low between the member countries of that group. Now that Britain isn't part of the EU, British businesses have to pay more to import or export goods to and from the EU countries, and the supply chain is now simply more complicated. This means more paperwork and costs are involved when businesses try to import or export to and from the EU. There is now less freedom of movement of people between the EU and Britain, which means it's harder to employ EU citizens here in the UK, which has led to skills shortages in some industries, making it more difficult and expensive to recruit, and in some cases pushing up the cost of wages that businesses have to pay to attract these new staff. Brexit has had a big impact on Lucas's business, as many of his customers are from the UK. Lucas also used to employ several British staff. He liked having people who could communicate with British tourists in their own language. However, due to Brexit, they are now no longer legally allowed to work in France, and Lucas has had to recruit new staff who are. So, the next thing to understand when it comes to the economic climate is that changes in exchange rates may also have an impact on businesses that trade with other countries. If the pound is strong, in other words, every pound is worth more in another country's currency, each pound will buy more overseas. That's good news for businesses who import goods from overseas, as they will get more for their money. However, on the other side, for businesses that export their products or services, meaning that they sell them to other countries, these will be relatively more expensive if the pound is worth more. So this might mean that this business sees a fall in demand from these other countries. The opposite will happen if the pound is weak. In other words, if the pound buys less in other countries, it will be bad news for businesses who import goods from overseas, as they will get less for their money. But it could be good news for businesses who export goods overseas, as their goods will be relatively cheaper for these customers abroad, and they might see an increase in demand from other countries. If the value of the pound drops against the euro, then the pound is worth less for British tourists, and as they have to pay our main character Lucas for their skiing holiday in euros, it will be much more expensive for them. British tourists might decide to go for holidays in other countries that don't use the euro, which will reduce the demand for Lucas's skiing trips. There are also many other factors that can affect a country's economic climate. Government policy or legislation, such as health and safety or minimum wage legislation, can have a big impact on the economy and on businesses, as they have to adapt and may incur higher costs. Even extreme weather conditions such as heavy snow that shuts down the transport network can have a major impact on the economy and therefore on businesses. Lucas's business has also been affected by unforeseen events. If there isn't sufficient snow for decent skiing, then the tourist economy in the French Alps will suffer, and as a result it's going to be a slow season for Lucas. Other unpredictable events, such as the COVID-19 pandemic or the 9/11 terror attacks, can have a serious impact on the economy and on the performance of these businesses. The final thing to consider when thinking about the economic climate is that it will also be impacted by inflation. But you might be thinking, what is inflation? Well, inflation is a sustained and ongoing increase in prices for the things that we buy, and a decrease in the worth of our money over time. Inflation means that businesses can sell products for higher prices alongside their competitors, but it will usually also cause wages to increase and raw materials to cost more because of these price increases. Inflation will also reduce the spending power that consumers have, if their wages do not increase in line with increases in prices. If things are going up and we're not getting paid more, then we simply have less to spend, and it's time to tighten up those purse strings. So that about sums it up. We have now looked at the most important factors that might impact the state of the economy. If you get a question in the exam about the impact of changes in the economic climate on a particular business, it's important to remember that there will be ups and downs, just as we've seen with Lucas. He has been very lucky that his business has continued to survive during times of poor economic conditions and has grown in times of a strong economy. But this will not be the case for every business. If you are lucky enough to build your own successful business, it will be vital to pay close attention to the state of the economy if you ever hope to be successful. This has been the BizWizard. See you in the next video.